Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
But to the question of populism, I want to hear from you what you think populist or populism actually means. It was interesting that the victorious Dutch Prime Minister, Mark Rutte, said as part of his victory speech that the Dutch voters had rejected, quotes, the wrong kind of populist, the wrong kind of populism. And Geert Wilders, in response to that, who stood on a very anti-Muslim platform, he says, I don't know what he means. I don't regard myself as a populist. But he's described routinely as a populist. He says he isn't one. So what do you say a populist is? 0345 6060 973, the number to call. You can text 84850 or tweet at LBC. The Pope was talking about populists in the last few days. He was saying that in his view it is an intrinsically bad thing. He was saying that a populist offers one answer to everything, offers the notion that one man or one woman is the answer to everything, and leans on difference and leans on division in order to appeal to people. Is that your definition of a populist? And it's interesting to read the statement that Judge Derek K. Watson, to give him his full title, the federal district judge who has ruled against Donald Trump's latest travel ban. It was a tweaked version of the first, banning travel from 7 different countries, all Muslim countries. Donald Trump's claim is that this is not an anti-Muslim ban, but Judge Watson has insisted on taking Donald Trump's election language and applying that to the order. He also added that Rudy Giuliani, a former New York mayor, but now a key figure in the Trump team, went on television to explain how the initial order came about. And he actually said, and I'm quoting him, when Donald Trump first announced it, he said, Muslim ban. He called me up and he said, put a commission together, show me the right way to do it legally. Now, Donald Trump, in response to this latest ban, is saying, we will win, we will get there, I will be allowed to defend America, when the reality of his travel order is that it is founded on an actual religious discrimination rather than a racist discrimination. But it's working for him. He's not getting his ban in, but in terms of support, electoral support, it worked for him. That was populism at the very least, racism, anti-religious discrimination. How do you see it? That's how I see it, but how do you see it? It's how the judge sees it as well. What do you say populism actually is? 0345 6060 973. We'll hear from somebody who's taken the time to write a book about the word populism in a few minutes. First, though, Yuri's called on this from Brighton. Hi, Yuri.
Hello, how are you doing?
Fine, thank you. Yeah, what do you say populism is?
I think it's kind of, I agree with you on what you said about Donald Trump, which is like there is like a good populism and bad populism, and bad populism is the one which resides on like bad emotions but no concrete facts and no actual good results for people, whereas you have like good populism, which quite often is being ignored by politicians, like the talks now about introducing the rent controls back into our system, which would in general save the government billions and increase the quality of life, and this is a good populism.
And I think I'm right in saying that Ed Miliband espoused that, didn't he, when he was Labour leader? Rent controls. So is he a populist?
I think the Labour has started talking about introducing some sort of rent controls, but overall, let's say, they never do anything. They never did anything to improve people's lives. They were just talking about popular things, but not actually doing things. They were not providing the factual solutions.
Which Labour are you talking about?
Any Labour that's been in the last 20 years, since I moved to UK when I was a kid.
But in that time, you've had more Labour governments than anything.
Yes, and they all talked about improving the quality of life and rent and, getting more properties out, and it never happened. They done other things, talked about other things again, which were popular, but they did not provide factual-based solutions.
Who do you say is a good populist then? Either here or abroad?
I would say the good populism is, for example, like in Germany, how they take care about the basic level quality of life. And this is why they get so much more support. I've recently been there and I've seen like the rents, the quality of life, the wages people get, and it's all been done but through like factual based research and control of what needs to be controlled and what doesn't need to be controlled.
And you would regard that as good populism?
Yes, I mean, it's based on the popular desires, but it's said, okay, you know, we can do the research and then work on that.
Okay, thanks, Yuri. Yuri in Brighton. James in Colliers Wood. Do you think there's such a thing as good populism?
Oh, yes, indeed. You quoted several names, Trump, Gilders, etc., but I would say Nigel Farage is an excellent example of good populism.
Describe his good populism to me.
Well, without him, we wouldn't be leaving the EU. He's dedicated his life to it. Well, I mean, half his life, should I say, yeah, but... hopefully we will come out of the EU. We're not out yet, but he's achieved his aim, and he's done an excellent job for the country.
And why is it populist rather than just politics?
Well, I don't like the word populist, yeah? I mean, it's been...
It's everywhere at the moment, isn't it? That's why I want to have a conversation about it.
For sure, yeah, but it's a label which is applied to too many aspects. Yeah, they're covering... I mean, it's a typical left-wing, should we say, label, which is just applied scattergun across the board.
You think it's just a left-wing label?
Is normally, he's also ridiculed as being a racist, which he's not. But I wouldn't say... if you're going to say populism, okay, should we say it's just people who are popular? And there's nothing wrong with that, is there? Somebody who's popular?
No, but the definition of populism isn't about popularity.
What is it then?
Well, I gave it earlier on. I don't know whether you were hearing what I said. The definition. Well, the definition is
was engaging me, and I missed it.
Okay, the definition is support for the concerns of ordinary people, the quality of appealing at ordinary people. Which isn't the same as being popular, is it?
Nigel Farage is an excellent example of a good populist.
OK, thank you, James. James in Colliers Wood. We'll hear from Anthony in Ealing in a few minutes. First, though, Theo Osherwood, LBC's political editor, has come in just to put some meat on the bone of the announcement from Theresa May that it looks like she's going to dig her kitten heels in and not agree to that second Scottish referendum.
Not for now, Sheila. She's ruled it out within the last half an hour. Of course, this comes off the back of Nicola Sturgeon, the Scottish First Minister, demanding a second referendum. There's going to be legislation brought before the Scottish Parliament next week. It then goes down to Westminster, and there's a request in for what's known as a Section 30 order. Theresa May has been reticent, of course, to rule out a second referendum because she doesn't want to be seen to be preventing the Scots from having their legitimate say on their future, but at the same time she doesn't think it's necessary because they had their referendum in 2014 and she doesn't want to try and bind herself when she comes to those Brexit negotiations. This is what the Prime Minister has been saying.
I say that just at this point, all our energies should be focused on our negotiations with the European Union about our future relationship and to be talking about an independence referendum would, I think, make it more difficult for us to be able to get the right deal for Scotland and the right deal for the UK. And more than that, I think it wouldn't be fair to the people of Scotland because they'd be being asked to make a crucial decision without the necessary information, without knowing what the future partnership will be or what the alternative of an independent Scotland would look like.
Now, the Scotland Act says, Section 30, I think it is, isn't it, that Westminster has to agree to this for it to happen. What will Nicola Sturgeon be responding to this with?
The obvious, or one of the obvious ways of trying to get round to this, if Nicola Sturgeon is so minded, is to say, OK, Scotland can have an advisory, non-binding referendum just to show the breadth of support for an independent Scotland.
Oh, she doesn't want one of those, does she?
But if she, of course, she loses it, then her goose is cooked. And if she wins it, Scotland doesn't. She doesn't achieve a huge amount. Nicola Sturgeon's whole argument has been that she wants continuity within the European Union. So she wanted it she obviously recognised the argument from Westminster was, well, let you need to have a look at actually what deals on the table from the European Union. So she said, okay, well, the earliest that can be is in the autumn of next year. But at the same time, she doesn't want Scotland to fall out of the European Union with the rest of the UK and then have to find its way, try and get back into the EU. That's why she said actually she wants a referendum before Britain actually leaves after that 2-year negotiation.
Although José Manuel Barroso has said you'll fall out anyway.
Yes, that hasn't helped her.
If you secede from the UK, you fall out of the EU.
Yeah, that hasn't helped her argument. Now, Theresa May hasn't ruled out a second Scottish independence referendum going toward 2021, because, of course, that isn't so much of a problem, because what Theresa May doesn't want to do is fight two battles on two different fronts, arguing with the European Union that we're going to be better off as an independent country, and then saying to Scotland, on the other hand, well, we're stronger together. You don't need to be independent. So, if she was to find herself in that situation, she would the tectonic plates of politics would be very, very difficult for her to win on both fronts. She's very difficult to keep the union together and get a good deal for Britain leaving the European Union.
And while I've got you, I know they're your least favourite words in the English language. Theo, while I've got you,
got myself into so much
is
trouble
Nicola
with these things.
Sturgeon a populist?
I'd say that thinking back to the 2014 referendum, there were populist elements to that, as she sought to create the widest breadth of support from across the political spectrum in Scotland. The SNP certainly is a...
But all politicians do that, don't they?
To some degree.
Well, just look at the definition of... We'll go to the break in just a sec, so I won't linger too long on this. But the definition of populism, I can't repeat it enough. Support for the concerns of ordinary people. And pretty much every single one of those words was in Theresa May's speech on the steps of Downing Street when she took over from David Cameron. She's no populist, is she?
But you could also say then, if you were saying ordinary people, you could then say that Tony Blair was a populist under that.
But it is used
argument.
Specifically now, or at the moment, it's used about specific politicians, isn't it? And a specific so-called wave of
I think it's used about a specific narrative of feeding into trying to, if you like, rightly or wrongly, it's used to describe a sort of mob mentality pulling in, the ordinary concerns of people.
But an ordinary concern can be about something a lot more than just immigration, or a lot more than the colour of the people who live in your street, can't it?
It can be whatever a politician decides it to be, Sheila.
Thank you very much. Good answer. Thank you very much, Theo Washerwood, LBC's political editor. We're talking about populists and populism. It's not a new word, but it's a word that we hear so much now, particularly about those emerging or more successful than they used to be, pre-existing, often right-wing parties that we're seeing across Europe, and indeed the Trump profile in America as well. And I'm looking here at a news website. It's a really interesting one on Europe, if you like looking at news around Europe. debatingeurope.eu it's called. And it says here that the social profile of people who vote for national populist parties are men in the main, not exclusively obviously, but in the main. Support for populist nationalist parties is weak among those who are more secure and salaried sections of the middle classes, citizens with a university level education. But populist parties are endorsed by citizens who have a negative attitude towards immigrants, refugees, and cultural and ethnic diversity. Now, that might not be something you needed to be told, but that is the social profile of the people who vote typically, not exclusively, but typically for so-called populist parties. What does populist mean to you? 0345 606 0973, the number to call. You can text 84850 or tweet at LBC. And bearing in mind that the victorious Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte, who has very much defeated the threat from Geert Wilders, the Freedom Party leader and sole member, in fact, he described him as the wrong kind of populism. Voters have rejected the wrong kind of populism. Is there a right kind? And if there is, what does it look like? 0345 606 0973. Anthony has called from Ealing. Anthony, thank you for your patience. You were one of the first to ring. Hi.
Well, hello, Sheila. I do agree a lot with your previous caller, if I might make some add points, and someone that's been pretty much involved and visited Holland over the years and knowing Dutch students and Dutch people over here. I think I've got a handle on it. And I think populist is a word that has become almost as bad as phobia. The word, sticking the word phobia, which I won't use, which you use, which your predecessor James O'Brien uses far too much. Sticking that on, and use the word negative. I wouldn't say that Geert Wilders was negative. I would say he was, unfortunately, and I'm from the left, realistic. And people who don't want to deal with the problems of Islam or having so many people in your country who are non-terrorists but won't integrate, they will use the word populist, like they will also use the word phobia. I mean, I can tell you, even the dictionary definition of agoraphobia, which is something I suffer with, is not up to date. So, I mean, they won't face it and they'll use a word like that and say it's all negative. No, it's not negative. I don't know if I'd like Geert Wilders or whether I'd vote for if I'm Dutch, but certainly...
but you think he had some very valid things to say?
Sorry?
You think he had valid things to say?
Oh, yes. I think in some ways, and I've done my turn in the 1940s, shivering in brick shelters while I've been bombed by the Germans and the fascists. I think he's got something valuable to say, which the left, unfortunately, and I'm a lefty, will not face up to, because, you know, it's almost like a culture. They don't live in the real world. In this country, I don't know about Holland.
And what is it? What is it that the left has to face up to? Is it a fear of Islamism, violent Islamism, which I suspect we would all agree, most of us anyway would agree, is something that we should try and stop and avoid? Or is it just Islam? Because Geert Wilders is openly just anti-Islam, isn't he?
Yes, so am I. But I mean,
all of it.
The point is, I do. Although I'm anti-Islam, I'm anti what it is. I'm anti the culture. I'm anti the fact because this religion is so strong, and in Europe, unfortunately, where it doesn't belong, it's not compatible with developed countries in Europe. I wish it wasn't, because I've had a couple of young Muslim people come up to me in the past year and saying, look, I was born here, my parents came here, although I was born here, brought up in England, I don't feel comfortable in this country, what can I do? And I'm quite sympathetic to them. I don't go around being nasty to people. I lived for the last 20 years in a house with Islamic people. I get on all right. I don't try to be nasty, but I am realistic. And
you think they're in the wrong place?
Well, they've got the difficulties, and I'm sympathetic. I've also had a couple of people, even born here, Pakistani, who have been quite nasty to me, and I hadn't said anything to them on the bus, who have threatened me in a way, saying we're going to take over. And they were born in this country. You've got to understand it. And the silly left, I mean, I think they mean well, and James O'Brien, but they don't really live in the real world. They live in the little middle-class world where they're not threatened by these things. People who live in a more ordinary world, as I do in Ealing, we know the problems, both plus and minuses.
And the fact
and
that
doesn't work.
And the fact that overall many, many, many more Muslims have been killed by violent Islamism than non-Muslims. How does that figure in your calculations?
Well, you could say that about Christians in Northern Ireland. What about the Roman Catholics blowing up Catholic children? This is terrorism. It's not exclusive to Islam.
No, I know.
But the problem is...
But you'd kind of think it was, wouldn't you, currently?
Yeah, but you see, it's not just about the terrorists. We haven't had a lot of terrorists. We don't know mine. Maybe it's because of our excellent intelligence service. We'll never know how many things have been prevented. We can't know. But the point is, it's about lack of integration. Now, I don't care about the colour or the religion of anybody. I've been along to the local mosque and seen the prayers and all the rest of it. But it doesn't work. And I've worked in this field for 15 years, trying to get everybody to mix together. And unfortunately... people don't change, and people with this strong cultural religion, which I think doesn't fit into developed countries of the West, don't change. I wish they did. Maybe the minority did.
And Anthony, just before we go to the news headlines, top of your head, give me an example of a positive populist.
Well, I think it's just a word like sticking phobia on the end. It's quite meaningless. I agree with Geert Wilders completely. It doesn't really mean much. It's just a convenient word, like the word gay has been borrowed and now means something. I mean, language is a living thing, but I think we've got to recognise it's used in a negative way.
So when he's described routinely, and probably by me sometimes in the past week when we've been talking about this, when he's described as a populist, what do you think we're trying to say? What do you think people are saying when they attach that word to Nigel Farage, to Marine Le Pen, to Geert Wilders, to Donald Trump? What do they mean, do you think?
What it means, I don't agree with them. I don't agree with everything that they say. I certainly don't agree with all the policies. But you don't approve that they've woken up to something and they are making a policy, if you like, about something that you don't agree with and you won't recognise. If you recognise it, we wouldn't have this rise of the right. I mean, having had a lot to do with Dutch people, I can tell you that even some young Dutch people today, even though they're in the EU, do not like German people.
All right, Anthony, thank you. I'm going to leave it there if I may. Anthony in Ealing, thanks for your call. Lots of texts and tweets coming in as well. I'll read some of those in a few minutes. Populism, what does it mean to you? Is there such a thing as good and bad populism? James has called, in fact, two Jameses have called, James in Romford and James in Forest Hill, to talk about populism. What do you think it is, James?
Well, I think populism is just looking after the grassroots people, regardless of what country it's in. Actually caring about people and their concerns. And what you're seeing now is that for many years now, the average concerns of the people on the street, and that's black, white, Asian, whoever it is, are not being listened to. And we're just being force-fed this globalisation and, oh, it'll be all right, and don't you worry. And if anything you say, excuse me, no, you're racist, shut up, don't speak, you're racist. And I'm sorry, Sheila, that sort of little profile you said earlier, that's feeding into this narrative that anyone who's got any concerns about their kids and how the area's gone down and there's beggars on the streets and it's all going to pot, suddenly... Well, hang on. None of the words that you've just said actually came out of my mouth about kids on the street and concern about your kids. Earlier, what's that little profile? Can you read it again, that little profile?
Right, I'll find it for you again, because I know what you're alluding to, but it's not what it said and it's not what I said either.
That's the left-wing narrative, my dear.
No. James, try not to call me my dear. It doesn't dispose me to a good conversation with you. Well, I made that clear that it was a script. It was actually a stated piece of journalism, and it was a profile of who votes for populist parties across Europe. I said no, debating Europe.eu. I said those words. I attributed where it was from. It's a news website that discusses Europe.
Oh.
That's all.
Yeah,
I didn't talk about kids on the street. I didn't talk about your concerns over your children, but I was about to ask you what grassroots people means and what their concerns are.
Well, basically, I'd say it's anyone who doesn't believe in globalism. The elite should just come and bleed us all dry and just leave us for dead. And this is happening all across Europe. It's happening all across the world, where the average man on the streets, they're finding their jobs are closing down and everything's being moved into a higher sort of, kleptocratic society. Now, anyone who is against that, who wants to have, their farming industry to be working properly, and everyone who's got these concerns, it doesn't matter what colour you are or what country you're in, anyone who's against that, I'd say is a populist, because they believe in people.
So in this increasingly globalised world, and you're right to say that we live in one, and we've been talking about what the definition of populism is. The definition of globalisation is merely the process by which businesses, other organisations develop international influence or international operations as opposed to just local operations. Are you in favour of getting rid of that tendency totally?
Yes, a perfect example of this is Uber versus the black cab trade.
Mm-hmm.
The black cab trade, that those people have been able to earn a good living for many, many years, and they've provided a very good service. Suddenly, you've got these global people coming in, they're sponsored by Google, they're giving people backhanders left, right and centre so they can get this thing in. They're undercutting everybody, and they're basically impoverishing people. And they don't give a damn about the average man on the street. All they care about is money, and they don't. It's a faceless globalist.
So you want limit. I'm guessing you probably don't want the entire eradication of the global economy's impact on the UK, because we benefit from it in lots of ways, don't we?
Well, they always keep telling us this, but it doesn't feel like this, Sheila. This is the problem. We can't have this discussion without being called racist.
Well, but you know, I haven't called you a racist at any point.
But you've alluded to anyone who's got these concerns, anyone who's a populist is a knuckle-dragging Neanderthal. And I know what you're getting at, but
James,
you're sort of like picturing people's minds. That's not the truth of the matter.
James, all I was saying was, again, attributing it to what I saw, which was some research into the voting profile of people who vote for populist parties across the UK.
Who made that profile? Who made that profile?
I've told you who made that profile.
What's their name?
It was a news organisation called debatingeurope.eu.
It comes from anyone like CNN, or these are all globalist-owned corporations. This is what I'm talking about. You're asking the opinion of people that are influencing the narrative.
But James, all I'm saying to you, well, hang on. If I said to you that the people voting for Labour currently have a particular profile, what would I be doing there other than reporting some facts which are found out when people assess who voted how after elections? Why you're ready to be called a racist when I haven't called you a racist once?
No, it's because it's the narrative that's being fed. You alluded to it earlier in that profile. You're asking a globalist for his opinion on the enemy. And the enemy is the people. It's people versus globalism.
The enemy is the people versus globalism. Thank you, James in Romford. James in Forest Hill. Make something of that for me. What did you make of what you had there?
Well, I was calling to say one thing, but in actual fact, in listening to James just then, it sort of makes me realise the other big thing about populism that I just really recognise is the blame. You know, in his argument, there's this underlying current that is just about blaming someone else. And that's what I think we want to move away from. Initially, when I was calling, I was to say, populism reminds me of that sort of awakening to politics when you're 12 or 13. And it's a little bit naive, and you sort of think, well, why don't they just do this? Or why don't they just do that? And things aren't as simple as that. The world is not black and white. It takes multitudes of looking at problems to understand them and to sort them out. And populism comes along, particularly from Nigel Farage or Trump, and says it's this one thing, and that one thing is usually someone or something we're going to blame. And that points to James from Collierwood, who called before the news, and James who's just been on. And it's a very naive, very ill-informed kind of understanding of just how things work. It takes a multitude of dynamics and understanding. And the thing that I also want to say is that populism so often followed or led by people like Farage and Trump, who had the best of it. They have had the best education, Dulwich College, into the city, making £1 million. His life has been set out for him, and yet he doesn't want other people to experience that. He wants him and that group to experience it.
Experience what?
Not include. Sorry?
To experience what?
To experience that good fortune, to experience, what it's like to not have to worry about your rent, to not have to worry about whether it's food or rent.
Well, what evidence do you have that Nigel Farage doesn't care about those issues?
Because I think once you reach a point of maybe having $1 million or a few million in the bank, you don't have to worry about those things. I'm talking about, your minimum wage. I'm talking about where I've been in my life, in my 20s, for a lot of time, where it has been a choice between food or rent. And I'm saying, if you come out of Dulwich College and you're qualified and you go into the city, my dad wasn't in a position to introduce me into those companies in the city and get me onto that rung. And I'm really pleased for anyone that has got that opportunity, but then to come back, and be Trump with the millions from your father, and to crush those people, or to put out of the arena those people who just want a better life for themselves. That's what I don't understand. It makes me want to cry, because it's just so awful.
Do you think there's such a, we had a caller on who thinks that Nigel Farage is an example of good populism. You obviously disagree, but
he's a good example of populism.
No, but that's not what the previous caller just before 1:30 meant. He meant he's good populism. Do you think there's such a thing as good populism?
No, never. It uses simplistic answers. People need to know what populism means, and they need to know what a demagogue is. And a demagogue, in the dictionary definition, is somebody offering simple answers to complex questions.
Okay, James. Thank you, James in Forest Hill. And thanks to the earlier James as well. You're listening to Shelagh Fogarty on LBC. More of your calls on the question of populism, what it means. Is it good? Can it be good or bad? 1:47. Now, I'm doing my best to send the link to the research tool I used from debatingeurope.eu to James, who rang. So, James, if you're still listening, I hope you're still listening. Don't be surprised if we ring you back to try and send you so that you can read what my source was and not perhaps be so defensive about what I was saying. But thank you for your call. Angus has called from Islington. Hello, Angus.
Hi, Sheila. Hi, Sheila. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you, yeah.
So I'm calling from Islington, obviously the capital of the metropolitan elite that obviously can't understand populism.
Islington in London.
Islington in London, yeah. And so what I wanted to say was I think that populism obviously is completely different dependent on your perspective about whether you're willing to consider what a so-called populist is saying, or whether you think it's only misinformed, it's ill-informed. And obviously that's why it's got this kind of pejorative connotation to it, which like James clearly was riling against.
I don't think populists are by definition ill-informed. Far from it.
Well, yeah, I think if you look at what populism is, as in like, so what does it mean? It just means a movement that looks at the interests of quote unquote ordinary people, but to make like the assumption that there's some kind of difference between people that are ordinary and what not ordinary or extraordinary, to make that
in and of itself, that's quite annoying, isn't it?
Exactly. So the whole concept is based on some kind of prejudice about where you are in society, how much you know about how politics works. So the caller just after James was talking about how it's based on kind of he felt it was based on an ill-informed tendency to blame people that aren't really responsible for the problems. But the thing I think is that having explored a lot of populist ideas recently, just to try and understand where the world is going, I've kind of felt that if you open yourself up and look at what they're saying, it's a very different politics from what we have. It's kind of on a different paradigm, but it's definitely...
Well, it is here, Angus. It's not just over there. It's here.
No, yeah, it is here. It is here. But the thing is that it's, I suppose it's not established itself. It's still anti-establishment. It's still revisionist. It's not actually in power. We have an established government which is listening to a kind of revolution that's going on, like a social political revolution. But for example, I suppose Trump is truly a populist who's now taking over. Essentially, he's now fighting.
Taking over what?
The U.S. establishment. He's rebuilding it in this new political paradigm, and which is why there's so much resistance in the current U.S. establishment, in the media, in the government, et cetera, et cetera.
It's also, to be fair to him, it's his stated aim. He's not hiding it, is he?
Exactly, yeah, because I mean that's the attraction, because there's so many people who feel like, look, the current establishment is stale. It doesn't offer the right kind of policies for ordinary people. It doesn't care about ordinary people. And then what's interesting, though, you then see almost every weekend of his presidency, he goes to an extremely lavish location to play golf, and Nigel Farage goes to see him, and they have a photograph taken in front of a solid gold lift door at Trump Tower. And all of a sudden, the idea that they're men of the people starts to wane, really, doesn't it? And again, to be fair to them, that can be said of many other so-called mainstream politicians. No, definitely. The thing with Trump is, this is where I'd say there is some merit to the idea of populism, is that essentially you're buying a product from someone that's really not able to deliver it. And that I don't think Trump is going to be able to solve the problems that he's trying to address for people, nor do I think that Brexit is going to particularly solve a lot of the problems that people are trying to address. But essentially, people are rebelling against, I suppose, global neoliberalism. James kept talking about globalism. In particular, I'd say you have to think about what kind of globalism, and it's about global market neoliberalism, and that's what people have decided they don't like. It's just that, or not everyone, just a lot of people.
All right, and Angus, I'm going to leave it there if I may. I want to hear from Ronnie before the news. Thank you. Keep doing the research and keep calling.
I will do. Thanks.
Thanks, Angus. Angus in Islington. Ronnie's call from Pimlico. Ronnie, hello.
Yeah, hi, Sheila. I would define populism as politicians that are not prepared to adhere to the PC establishment line, are not prepared to sort of toe the narrative of the mainstream establishment and media, and speak on behalf of those who are, by and large, marginalised or feel alienated with views that are considered to be, how can I put it? It's sort of non-conformist or uncouth in polite society. But these people are a large minority, if not a majority, of a kind of underlying sentiment that is bubbling in society, and this populism allows their voice to be sort of aired out and expressed in a straightforward, cogent, unambiguous way.
So you think it's cutting out the CRAP?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Ronnie. Didn't want to say it, but there you go. Ronnie, thank you. Time for Matthew in Bristol, just briefly before we go to the news at 2. Hello, Matthew. What's populism in your view?
Hi there, yeah. Well, I think no matter what the definition of populism is, what concerns me is the way that it is banded around now more, and it therefore feels like it's dismissing people who vote for something. So a classic example would be, for example, with the Brexit votes, people saying that's a populist vote. Nigel Farage and UKIP are a populist party. However, that dismisses it, because it wasn't just people who voted for UKIP who voted to leave. There were people in Labour, there were people in Conservatives. And so therefore, by just labelling something as a populist movement, I think it dismisses the people who have genuine concerns about something. And I think what Mark Rutte did in the Netherlands tried to distinguish between good ones and bad ones, but I think that still isn't the right way to use it, basically.
All right, thank you, Matthew. Matthew in Bristol, thank you very much for your call. Sorry I didn't get through to all of you, or indeed read out a lot of those texts and tweets that came in as well. We'll keep an eye on them and hopefully do that in the next couple of hours.